So I realised that they were campaigning for Better Together. And it was just the Tories. No Labour, no Lib Dem, just Tories. And I think it made me realise, as I was walking back up the road with my leaflet and my milk in hand, it made me sort of question my own position. And I started to think, why am I aligning myself with these people? The Conservatives, the people that I've always stood very strongly against. Why would I want to align myself with these people?
I think in Scotland we're sort of well, I certainly was. I grew up like yourself in quite a strong Labour supporting family, and I was a bit programmed to dislike
the Tories.
The Tories and what they stood for. And again, I didn't really actually understand what they stood for at the time.
Well, you're a wee bit younger than me, so you didn't go through... I mean, I was growing up in the 1980s, so I saw what Margaret Thatcher did to Scotland. Yeah. And I think that cemented how we feel about the Tories. Yeah. So,
although, saying that, I can still reel off exactly, probably the same things. I can't remember how it felt at the time, but I know that in our area alone, like, shipbuilding was a massive thing, and that was stripped down by Margaret Thatcher's era. Coal mines, there's quite a strong coal port, isn't there not? And to be fair, that still trades, but I don't think it has anywhere near the strength it used to.
It was almost obliterated by Thatcher in the 1980s.
And older generations of my family just need to mention poll tax, and you know,
it's not good. So then the more I thought about it, it began to dawn on me that the only people who really have anything to gain from a no vote in September are the Conservatives. Because at the moment, the Conservatives are the ruling party in Britain, and yet there's only one Conservative MP from Scotland. So I suddenly...
Dumbarton, isn't it?
Yeah. So I suddenly realised that people in Scotland they're not being represented in the UK Parliament at all. Our votes mean nothing. We haven't voted Tory, and yet we've got a Tory government.
Yeah, I don't think Scotland's voted Tory since the 70s.
No, definitely not. And then I started to think about Thatcher in the 80s and how she decimated the industries you were talking about, you know, particularly in Scotland with the shipbuilding and the coal mining. And yet, Scotland never voted for Margaret Thatcher. But we had Margaret Thatcher ruling us and doing all these horribly destructive things, and the poll tax as well. And that's when I realised that it's time for change. It's time for something different.
See, that in itself, that alone to me stands out as like one of the strongest reasons to vote yes. I'm kind of sick of the way things are at the moment.
Well, we keep being told it's better the way it is. We get the best of both worlds, better together, better the devil you know, all that stuff. And you think things are crap just now. So why would you want to keep things? Why people keep saying, preserve the status quo? Why would you want to do that when the status quo is not fantastic? In the current political system that we have, people in Scotland can vote for whoever they wish. Labour, SNP, Lib Dem, Green. They can vote for whoever they want in a general election. And it's pretty much an irrelevance. We will only, as it stands in the current system, we will only ever get the government that England votes for. Because of the population differences, obviously. And that is simply, to me, that's not fair. So I'm saying yes to change. I'm saying yes to a groovy progressive future. Most importantly, I'm saying yes to democracy. One of the main purposes of this show is to interact with you, the viewer. Now, we've set up an email address which will appear below Paul right now. And what we'd like is for people who've got questions that they'd like answered, or perhaps maybe there's undecided people who need convinced. We want people to email us with questions, with queries, anything like that. And we will read your emails. We'll read them out on this, and we'll try to deal with as many as we can in the time that we've got in the run-up to the referendum. And the plan is to put up a few of these every week over the next month or so, in order to help people who haven't quite decided yet. So I think something else we hope to do is to put people's minds at rest, because the majority of the No campaign, as we've talked about a little bit earlier on, the majority of the No campaign has been based on scaremongering. And this is what people are mostly reading about in the media.
Yeah, well, this is what I was victim of.
Well, that is. I mean, that's if you're just basing your decision on the newspapers and the news that you see on the telly, all the Better Together stuff, pretty much all of it, is based on scaremongering. And we're here to try and answer some of these fears, or allay some of these fears that have been put into people's minds. Now, the problem is, the word might keeps coming up in the Better Together rhetoric. You might lose the pound. You might need passports to get to England. You might lose your pension. You might not get back into the EU. And it's all baseless. I mean, last week we had our former Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, telling the country that we might lose out on organ transplants in an independent Scotland. Something to do with the fact that some of the organs come from England, and therefore if we are an independent country, the organs will not come here anymore. And, you know, the NHS were very quick to debunk this, saying that this would only happen if the UK government actually made this law.
Yeah.
Which, to me, would be utterly pointless. So, he's threatening something, and then the NHS are saying, I mean, that's not true. It's not true at all.
There is actually precedents to completely oppose that as well. Like, there's trading that goes on, I say trading, but it goes on between European hospitals. They share services, they share resources. So,
well, it's something
that would continue.
It's something that we have. I mean, you and I went to an event a couple of weeks ago now where somebody from the NHS spoke, and she was saying that that's the difference between Scotland and England, is that in their NHS in England, it's very much heading towards privatisation, and each hospital is like a business. They're in competition with each other. Whereas up here, the people who manage each hospital, they have meetings and they actually share ideas and they work together for the betterment of people's health, which is how the NHS should be run. Yeah. And she was basically explaining that the NHS in England is probably going to be privatised, fully privatised within the next 10 years. And as a result of that, because the way the funding for our NHS comes from London, if their NHS is privatised, in 10 years' time, there's not going to be a lot of funding for our NHS, because it's in relation to how much the English NHS gets. And that would mean that within maybe 15 years, our NHS would have to be privatised as well. And I don't think anybody wants that. Yeah. I know that now sounds like I'm scaremongering, but I'm just reporting what somebody from the NHS has said as a concern.
Well, as we've said previously to each other, and I think on this as well, that there's a lot of kind of misconceptions and misinformation that does get bandied about, and I came across this very, very recently when I was listening to someone who was trying to make a point for Better Together and the security of the NHS, and went on this very, very long-winded thing about a rant about how since the SNP have come into power, there's been less money spent on nurses, there's been cuts in hospitals, there's been cuts in services within hospitals, and ranted and ranted and ranted about this. And I had to point out that the funding that the SNP and the Scottish Government has received is a Westminster decision.
That's it.
There has been a reduction in that.
London Parliament
formula.
The London Parliament decides how much money we get to spend. So you can't really blame the Scottish Government for what they spend, because they can only spend what they're given by London.
You spent everything you had and didn't have enough
on the nurses and the hospitals.
You idiots.
Irresponsible idiots. So hopefully we're going to be here over the next few weeks to allay your fears. We will act as a soothing balm. So that's the end of the first episode of Ask Indy. This was all about introducing us and what we're planning to do. Now, what we are going to plan to do over the next few weeks is we're going to try and address any questions that get thrown at us. And also, I think what we'd like to do is, each time we do an episode, we'd like to come up with an argument for why we think independence is a good thing. And we'll also look at one of the commonly made arguments made by the Better Together side. And we will attempt to analyse it and maybe find holes in it and show where we don't necessarily agree with what they're saying.
I'm actually anticipating that probably quite a lot of Better Together people with the safety and anonymity of the internet are going to start going, oh no, the pair of you don't know what you're talking about. Here's why. And I'm actually really looking forward to this.
I don't mind that. And
Because
I mean,
I've been looking for good information.
I would
on
also say, if you're watching this and you think we're talking rubbish and you believe in the better together rhetoric rather than the yes rhetoric, I would say start your own podcast, start your own YouTube channel, and make your point. Because as Paul said, I've tried to look up stuff for Better Together. I've tried to have conversations with people about, on the Better Together side, and certainly on Facebook, if you try and make comments on a Better Together page, you get deleted and you get barred, because that's happened to me a few times. I've gone on Better Together pages. I've made very reasonable points, because I'm not a cybernat, as they call them, right? Which I don't necessarily think there's many of them around. But I go on these Better Together Facebook pages, and I leave comments. I leave perfectly calm, rational comments, without swearing, without any aggression, and on more than one. Well, I am quite pacifistic. I don't believe in violence. I don't like aggression. I don't like confrontation. I just go on and make my point, and first of all, you'll get people calling you names. You'll then get people deleting what you've written, and then you get blocked from these sites, which is terrible, because this is all about debate and discussion, and you can't have a debate and discussion if you're not allowed to make your point. So I'm quite happy for people to email or make comments on the Better Together side, because I'll answer them. I'm quite happy to answer them. And I would also say, yeah, go for it. Start your own YouTube show. Start your own podcast. Get out there and get your message across, whatever side you believe in, because I don't think there's enough of it. Certainly not on YouTube. There's not enough stuff. I mean, you and I were talking about podcasts earlier on, because there are one or two independence podcasts. I mean, I do a podcast that has a news show, and we talk about independence and that. You try and find Better Together podcasts.
They just don't exist.
There's no such thing. Now, I don't know if that's just because people who support Better Together aren't that passionate and they're not that bothered, or, dare I say it, they're slightly embarrassed and ashamed of the fact that they're Better Together. But I would love to hear people trying to make the case for Better Together, because I think what a lot of people on the Better Together side do is they listen to the yes side, and then they slag them off and they belittle them and they make fun of them. What they very rarely do is just sit down and come out with some positives as to why you should vote Better Together. All they do is they slag off Alexander, they slag off the SNP, they slag off anything that you say in support of independence, but then they don't really say anything positive about the merits of staying together, apart from just saying, "Oh, better the devil you know." Ooh, best of both worlds. The kind of rhetoric that we read in all the Better Together brochures. Anyway, we shall be back again in a few days' time, hopefully. And we hope you enjoy this. And if you do, and if you know anyone that's undecided, tell them to follow us. Tell them to subscribe to our channel. Ask Indy. The email address will appear at the bottom of this plenty of times. Contact us. Spread the word. Make your own YouTube videos, make your own podcasts, do all that stuff, because we want people to be engaged in this, because it's a good time, it's an interesting time to be in Scotland, it's an interesting time to be political. Yeah. So, we shall see you next time on the Ask Indy show. Farewell.
See you later.
Bye.
You could vote yes, you could vote no, you could pretend that you still don't know. I will suggest, I might even confess, what will be best is if you vote yes.
Right, so we're having another test. This is for the 3D version.
3D. I don't know why I'm just repeating the last word.
It could be.
We're going to turn it into a rap thing.
I think we've misunderstood that it's an iPad, not iMacs. I think you're thinking it's iMacs. It's iPad.